The elected leaders of the Republican Party have two choices today. They can admit they do not know basic law enforcement procedure, or they can admit what their sheep would most likely consider far, far worse, that they're really secretly pretty confident in Commander-in-Chief Obama. Here's what happened. Yesterday, John Brennan, the assistant to the president for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism, revealed that top Republicans in Congress and on the intelligence committees were all briefed by Brennan on Christmas night about the capture of Umar Farouk Abdul-Muttalib, the accused underwear bomber. And all four Republicans, the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, House Republican Leader John Boehner, Senate Intelligence Committee Vice Chairman Kit Bond, and House Intelligence Ranking Member Pete Hoekstra, were informed that Abdul-Muttalib was in FBI custody. They have publicly complained that Abdul-Muttalib was not taken into military custody but put into the civilian system, which of course includes Miranda rights warnings. But what did they say to the Obama administration secretly before their public political plan took form?
I spoke to Senators McConnell and Bond. I spoke to Representative Boehner and Hoekstra. I explained to them that he was in FBI custody, that Mr. Abdul-Muttalib was in fact talking, that he was cooperating at that point. They knew that in FBI custody means that there's a process then you follow as far as Mirandizing and presenting him in front of a magistrate. None of those individuals raised any concerns with me at that point. They didn't say, is he going into military custody? Is he going to be Mirandized? They were very appreciative of the information. We told them we'd keep them informed, and that's what we did. So there's been quite a bit of an outcry after the fact where, again, I'm just very concerned on behalf of the counterterrorism professionals throughout our government that politicians continue to make this a political football and are using it for whatever political or partisan purposes, whether they be Democrats or Republicans.
Rather than admit, yes, of course they were comfortable with the Obama administration's FB freaking eye with a head appointed by President Bush, envy of law enforcement all over the world, taking the lead on this, Miranda and all. Today, those four Republican leaders would rather have America believe they did not know that the FBI Mirandizes suspected terrorists. Kit Bond whining in a typical statement, quote, "Brennan never told me of any plans to Mirandize the Christmas Day bomber." Of course, if they want people to believe they're really that ignorant about the subject, kudos to McConnell spokesman Don Stewart, who said in a statement that on Christmas Day, Abdul-Muttalib was, quote, a known terrorist. In fact, Abdul-Muttalib had been linked to 0 incidents of terrorism before Christmas Day, as any of the remaining honest Republicans would admit to you, at least in private. Let's turn now to Chris Hayes, the Washington editor of The Nation magazine. Chris, good evening.
Good evening, Keith.
Am I basically on target about the GOP choice here and which one it seemingly prefers after today's round of statements?
Well, I guess there's a third option, which is that they've sort of selective amnesia about the entire Miranda decision 40 years ago, which conservatives, let's recall, hated when it first came out and have sort of been opposed to forever. So maybe they're just sort of glossing over the fact that Miranda is good law right now. But no, look, I mean, this is manifestly and obviously completely, absolutely fabricated as an issue. It's not an issue. They have just it's amazing the way that they have reverse engineered this into being a topic of debate. This is standard practice. It was done under the Bush administration. It was done in this case. And the notion that this is somehow extraordinary or shows some radical deviation is just crazy. I mean, and I think the Brennan's report of that briefing shows that this is completely fabricated.
Yeah, the only thing that was missing today was some explanation that the Miranda they thought he was referring to or was referred to in the law was from Sex and the City. What would most of the rabid Republicans, I mean, at the Tea Party, what would they think of the concept that Republican officials secretly would have cordial, professional, non-yelling phone calls with a man like John Brennan without putting on a show of Miranda, soft on terror, et cetera, blah, et cetera, blah, et cetera?
Well, they wouldn't be happy with it. I mean, what's interesting is you're seeing here actually a mirror image of what we saw during a lot of what happened in terms of the Democratic Congress and the briefings it received from the Bush administration, right? Which is that these briefings are very strange kind of encounters in which, you know, the executive does really hold the cards, first of all. Second of all, there's a lot of consensus amongst the players in the national security state on national security policy. I mean, we've seen there is a kind of, you know, basic consensus among policymakers, and obviously there were huge deviations during the Bush administration. There are some things the Obama administration that are doing now that are awful. But there's a lot more agreement than there is disagreement. And then what happens is when they're out of the room and in front of the cameras, then you get a lot more disagreement. So I think that we're actually seeing sort of an interesting through line on that, which is that policy that's produced sort of behind closed doors has a tendency to kind of coalesce around consensus.
I want to, and you're involved in this too, but I want to take a second to issue a public challenge to those 4 Republican members of Congress tonight. And I'd like to, if you can, gentlemen, document however you see fit the record since 9/11 of intel about imminent threats coming through the military tribunal system as opposed to intel about imminent threats coming through civilian law enforcement. And, you know, while they figure out how many, 37,000 preconditions before they'd be willing to answer my challenge there, you want to take a whack at it, Chris?
Well, look, this is something that the FBI has been trained to do forever. And one of the craziest things about Bush administration counterterrorism policy was that interrogations were shifted into the military apparatus. In the beginning, I mean, let's recall and go back and look at some of Jay Mayer at the New Yorker's incredible reporting on this. You had people doing interrogations, whether it was in Bagram or whether it was in Guantanamo, who had absolutely no training. They'd been given a 30-day course. They were just soldiers who'd been plucked and were now, supposed to be getting information out of people, whereas you had an entire ranks of people inside the FBI who are highly trained in interrogations, to do lawful interrogations, and to, get information out of people that in ways that don't involve torture, that don't involve these extraordinary measures. And that's where the locus of institutional knowledge on interrogation is and always has been, and that's where it makes sense to put those are the people it makes sense to put in charge when you're faced with a situation like this.
But of course, the point of all that was obviously the torture. It was to fill a certain narrative, and it was deliberately chosen so that these people would not get any information. But we've been through this already. Chris Hayes of The Nation, great thanks.
Thank you, Keith.
New Orleans is officially over Katrina. So says no less an authority than our guest, New Orleans resident and Super Bowl winning Saints fan Harry Shearer. Remember the Daily Kos poll about Republicans Bill O mocked? They quoted it yesterday on Fox News to support Sarah Palin. Worse ahead. And when Rachel joins you at the top of the hour, live by the Ku Klux Klan, die by the Ku Klux Klan. Ron Paul facing 3 different primary challengers, all of them from the Tea Party.